Welcome to Grapple Arts Radio.
Hello everybody, Stephan Kesting from GrappleArts.com here. Today I've got Ryan Hall on the line. Ryan's a super accomplished and very prolific competitor. He's competed all over the world, hundreds and hundreds of tournaments, and he's known for a variety of things. He's known for certain exotic guard positions. He's known for being laser focused on certain submissions, and also as having a very rapidly evolving game, and we're going to get into that as well. We're going to start off the interview, Ryan, by talking about your competitive background. How many tournaments have you actually competed in?
Yikes. I'm not honest. I actually have it written down. I have a record of every single match and every single opponent that I've ever competed against, actually almost every single name, actually, from all the way back from white belt. And so I've got it somewhere, but well over 100 tournaments. Probably I would say in the neighborhood of 200 tournaments. I think I've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 competitive matches, 450 competitive matches. So a little bit I've been able to get around, and I've been fortunate to compete a lot, I guess.
And of late, yes, you've still been competing in the tournament format, but you've also been being singled out for super fights or one-off matches. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. I've been fortunate enough lately, I guess, to be able to compete against some pretty tough opponents, at super fights at the Grappler's Quest and the UFC Fan Expo and here and there. I've actually been doing super fights, I guess, since I was a pretty new purple belt, and actually almost brand new purple belt, I guess, but been able to be, I guess, reasonably successful. There's a lot of really tough guys to be able to compete against, but particularly as you get up towards, black belt, and at least in the United States, it becomes increasingly difficult to go to a tournament and have more than maybe one or two matches. And as a result, a lot of times I think promoters find it more in their interest to make sure that they get the two guys that they want to compete and hopefully generate some interest. And I've been fortunate enough to be tapped for some of those.
Cool. And can you just blow your own horn here for a second and talk about some of the medals and titles that you've got on your trophy shelf? What does it look like? What are some of the names there that I would recognize?
Well, I guess at purple belt back in 2007 and 2008, I was able to win the No-Gi Worlds as a lightweight at purple belt. I won the World Championships in the gi as purple belt, lightweight division as well. I won the European Championships as purple belt and ended up with third at the Brazilian Nationals, the Brasileira, also at purple. At brown, as soon as I got my brown belt, I actually got a pretty serious injury and had 3 surgeries, and didn't even know that I was going to be able to continue competing, actually, and that's when I opened up my academy. But I was able to compete. I was out for about 8 months, and then was able to train for 2 months, and went back to the World Championships again. This time as a brown belt, and ended up with third. I lost in the semifinal 6-4 to a really tough guy named Zach Maxwell. And I won the Abu Dhabi trials that year as well to earn my spot for the opportunity to compete with the toughest no-gi guys in the world, and was fortunate enough to end up placing third at ADCC. I've been able to win, I guess, a fair number of super fights here and there at the UFC Fan Expo. I think something like 15-2, I guess, in super fights, mostly against black belts. But my first one, I remember this was kind of meaningful because it was the first important match I ever won, and it was against a guy that I really respect a lot named Renato Tavares. And this was on October 28th, 2006 at Anaga in Miami, and I was able to beat Renato Tavares 3-2. And that was the first super fight I ever won. But so I guess that's kind of the more major stuff. Been able to win some of the open tournaments as a black belt, like the New York, or rather the Chicago Open, won the Absolute there, Miami Open, Houston Open. So I've gotten around, but no major titles with the gi on as of yet at black belt. I was able to win the World Pro Trials in Montreal, but I'm still trying to do my best and see what I can do better for the future there.
Okay. Now, how on earth did you fund all this? We all know that there's not a ton of money in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission grappling competitions, so are you like a trust fund kid or something?
Unfortunately, no. Well, I guess, actually, I don't know. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure how I would regard that. But anyway, I guess, no, actually, I was fortunate to grow up, in a very, very stable family, but no, I'm not independently wealthy. But I actually, in the beginning, I spent all of my money competing and traveling, which wasn't all that much of it, actually. When I started jiu-jitsu, I was doing tournaments every weekend, and I remember I made a bunch of money working at a grocery store when I was in senior year of high school, and then took all of that money and spent it on jiu-jitsu, and then dropped out of college, which I don't know that I recommend to other people, but was able to continue competing, spend all my money there, and then eventually when I was training with Team Lloyd Urban, I was competing for them, and then now that I have my own academy and I'm able to support myself, but basically there's not a lot of money in jiu-jitsu, and anyone who tells you different is either A, onto something that I know nothing about, or B, not entirely honest, but you really can get around on the cheap if you do. I used to referee for Grapplers Quest, for Naga, and I had, as a result, had the opportunity to compete all over the place, stay with friends here and there, compete as much as possible. So it sounds a little bit more expensive than it is unless you want to talk about going to, say, for instance, Europe or Brazil, in which case it starts to get a little pricey.
Okay. So now that you've got all this competitive experience under your belt, are you still nervous when you compete? And were you ever nervous when you competed?
Well, I don't know if nervous is the right word. I've played with a lot of different mental approaches over time, trying to learn what works best for me, and I'm a firm believer that everyone can kind of find their own mental niche for what works best for them in terms of, the state of mind that they need to be in. I remember in the beginning, when I first started, I would try to get all amped up and, almost not maybe angry is not the right word, but a little ticked off, I guess, before a match. It's like, oh, man, I got to fight someone. I have to go and, get upset. And then that worked for a little while, but then that's kind of petered out a little bit for me, and then I realized maybe that's not the right way because that's not who I am. I'm not a super crazy aggressive person, so maybe that's not the right way for me. Then I started going with I think I'm going to take a nap literally up until 2 minutes before my match. I would just fall asleep and go in and then compete, and I would walk out almost like a zombie sometimes, like extremely relaxed, which was working for a while, I guess, and it kept me very calm, and I've always haven't had that much of trouble being clear-headed during matches because, again, I was just focusing on not really winning and losing, things that are ultimately outside of my control, but really more on just, performing well and trying to focus on my technique and doing my own personal best, and then hopefully that'll be enough. And I guess that worked out for a while, but what I was eventually able to do is I've read a lot of books about sports psychology, and I'm no expert by any means, but I've been able to tinker with my approach, and now I'm trying to find the right balance of, kind of almost like emotional content, getting yourself, amped up to the point where you're able to be effective, but it's not, and you're able to, perform your best, but it's not overwhelming you, because I've seen that occur a lot. If you look in the bullpen at any major, the IBJJF tournaments, the Worlds, you'll see all kinds of different people. You'll see calm, you'll see intense, you'll see, all types of different things, and then you'll see sometimes people that let the moment get to them, and then they almost look entirely drained. And I guess what I've read and what I've understood is that, the more skilled you are as an athlete, the higher level you are as an athlete, the less of a danger it is to become, I guess almost infused emotionally, because it won't affect your technique as well, or as much as it might otherwise, as if I were a bit more of an amateur athlete. Then any type of outside stimulus, like, again, like being frustrated, being angry, being nervous, could really impact me. So I think as I've gotten a little bit more experience, the nerves have gone away, and I wouldn't call it nervousness anymore. I'd almost call it more like excited, ready to compete, and looking forward to a challenge, as opposed to, like, oh, I'm going to beat this guy up or something like that. That's never really been my thing, I guess.
The sports psychology books that I've read on that, they talk about the optimal state of arousal, which is perhaps a poor choice of words in our context, but is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I was talking about, and that's the specific phrase, I think. And I think that the optimal state of arousal, as I've been able to understand it, is actually not only different for every person, but highly different for every sport. Whereas, say, for instance, you're a lineman in football, a lineman would want to be in an entirely different mental state than, say, for instance, the quarterback. Mm-hmm. It's just an entirely different job, an entirely different mental approach. And, for instance, and now jiu-jitsu is such a highly technical exercise, as opposed to, say, sprinting, which is also highly technical, of course, but a little bit more explosive, started and finished very quickly. It's, again, finding the right spot where you're able to be up and sharp, but also mentally aware and able to react quickly to different situations is pretty important. And, so I guess that's exactly the phrase that I would use.
Okay. Now, I guess really it only comes from experience with going in at too high a state of arousal and burning yourself out, not being able to think, and then too low a state of arousal and not being able to capitalize or use the aggro energy when it might have helped you in a situation, and trying to dial it up and down as your experience level grows, which is exactly what you were doing, it sounds like.
And I've been on the wrong end of both of those, actually, and I still am every now and then. Like there have been certain tournaments where, win or lose, I'll just say, man, I didn't really perform. I don't really feel like I performed well. Not like, oh, the other guy was really tough, and I just somehow expected to walk through him. It was more like, man, I just didn't really feel sharp, or felt like too amped up, or just kind of the entire day just felt, not into it. And that can be for a variety of reasons. But, yeah, even now I find myself on both ends of that. And then when everything comes together and you have a great performance, is usually when you find that optimal level of arousal, not only for the sport but for the moment, for that day, everything seems to be clicking. And when you're able to maintain, or at least for me, I can only speak for myself, when I've been able to maintain and find and maintain that state of mind, or at least recall it very, very clearly, I'm able to find it again. And that's one of the big things that I think competition gives us in constant competition. For instance, if I compete only, once every 6 months, I kind of lose touch with what it's like with the proper frame of mind. It's easy to have all these other things, all these other little voices in your head telling you what you think you need to be doing. But if you're competing all the time, not only will you be gaining experience, but you'll be gaining experience psychologically preparing yourself to perform at your best. And I think that's absolutely critical.
So in order to get ready for a competition, you should enter a competition.
Yeah, it's kind of that weird catch-22.
Okay. All right. So let's move a little bit into the technical side of things, Ryan. Let's talk about the guard position, because really through your videos and through watching you compete, that seems to be what a lot of people know you from. The guard positions such as the inverted guard, the deep half guard, the 50-50. Could you talk a little bit about your guard game initially and how it evolved and where your guard game is right now?
Sure. Well, initially, all I played was the closed guard. I remember when I was a white belt, I think I won my last 16 matches as a white belt by submission, all from triangles and arm locks. And it was, get the closed guard and then go. And closed guard felt like a comfortable place for me, because even against stronger players, like stronger, not only physically stronger, but, more skilled, more technical, more experienced, I said, man, if I get myself to the closed guard, I can at least hold on to them now. And when I say that, I it wasn't until I was partway through purple belt that I actually experienced training with an elite level player, like a really elite level player, and that was Bruno Frazado. So there would be guys that I would train with that, even though they were more experienced, maybe they were a little bit more recreational. So, I would get to close guard and feel great, whereas I'm sure that when I was a white or blue, if I'd have been close guard against Bruno Frazado, that would have lasted for about 4 seconds. But it started out with the closed guard, and then eventually I was like, man, people are kind of getting wise to this when I was a blue belt, not only in training but in competition. I was competing so often that people started to pay attention a little bit. Not that I was anybody, just that they were paying attention because there was only one thing that I was really doing. And what I started doing eventually there was I would start to go upside down, because I found out that I was kind of hyper-flexible in a few ranges of motion, and I know very little about flexibility, by the way. That was just happened to discover that. And I didn't mind being upside down, didn't mind being compressed by really big people, and I would go upside down, and then I would shoot a triangle at them, and I would either A, hit the triangle, or B, if I missed the triangle and they postured up, I would land myself in close guard, get me back to my area of comfort. And, eventually people started giving me a really hard time. They started standing up when I would invert on them, and I would start shooting triangles at them, and I'd get it every now and then, even if they were standing fully upright. But against the better guys, against the more experienced guys, that was really tough. So the natural progression was kind of weaving. When they would stand all the way up, I would kind of weave my leg through theirs and then end up in 50-50 and start to get after them with footlocks. I really didn't start sweeping anyone until three-quarters of the way, through purple belt. I think I had something like 120, 130 matches as a blue belt. I couldn't have scored more than 20 or 30 points throughout the entire course of that. And if any time I scored, it was mostly accidental.
And most of your wins came from triangle, is that correct?
Most of them came from triangle, and I think up until brown belt, I had a fair number of wins, and I think something in the order of like 98% of them were by submission, not simply because I was going after submission, because I literally didn't try to do anything positional, which I don't think was ideal, and I don't really blame that on anyone. It's just that was kind of what I was doing at the time, and it was working fairly well. And because I got to purple belt relatively quickly, and I was a purple belt for a pretty short time. I wasn't one of those guys that was in for 8 years and is still a purple belt, and then as a result has a little bit more of a robust game. I was forced, because I was kind of moving up the ranks relatively quickly and constantly facing opposition more experienced than me, significantly more experienced than me, that if I wanted to be successful against them, I would have to pull them into my area of strength, or the area at which I felt that I had whatever chance to win, and that was almost always the guard. And basically, when I started working with one of my first coaches, one of the first coaches that made a really big impact on me, that was Danny Ives. He started getting me working on the half guard because that was one of his most comfortable positions. I started to develop the half, and that really didn't kind of flesh out until most of the way through purple belt, but actually ended up being pretty important for me because I was able to, I won the finals of the World Championships with a half guard sweep to the back, and for purple belt, not for anything else, but started to really work on that, and then around brown belt, really the half guard started to develop significantly more.
And is this the deep half guard, Ryan, or is this the more generic standard half guard? This
is the deep half guard. I really don't make a distinction because in my mind there is almost no such thing as like a shallow half guard. Not that it doesn't work, just that if you notice, and again, this is just my opinion at this point in time, which again is of course subject to change, and if anyone, if Roger Gracie says something differently, don't listen to me, listen to him. But, for instance, if you notice almost all sweeps happen when I'm underneath you. So I can play a far away style of half guard, but I'm going to have a hell of a time sweeping anybody with any kind of base, generally speaking. So, when I say the half guard, I'll play it with one leg, but the goal was always to get underneath because not only would it allow me to destabilize my opponent's balance, but if I was able to do that and they were to start to become, concerned about their balance and try to run away or extend or post out, then I would be immediately on top of their legs, looking for, for a lock of some kind and then using that to score. But my guard game over time has started out with a closed, then went to inverted, eventually to 50-50, seated and half guard, and now continues to be the half guard and the seated guard, as well as, what Marcelo Garcia likes to call the one-leg X guard or the footlock position. Because I've played footlocks and heel hooks, for so long, it's always been a comfortable position for me, and I'm really trying to work hard to develop it further and, make positive changes in my game there.
Okay. Now, that's your development, but not everybody who's listening to this, or not all of your students for that matter, have your specific set of attributes, your strengths and, I suppose, your weaknesses. So what advice could you give to people who are trying to put together a coherent guard game where they can deal with most situations? So essentially, what kind of guards do you need, and how do you know what kind of guards you need for your kind of body and your kind of game?
Well, I think it's a great question, Stephan, and I'll do my best to answer. Well, I guess I would say that in my mind, I like to use analogies a lot, and I feel that it helps me understand jiu-jitsu. It helps me understand, whatever I can see in the world, I guess. And I feel like when I teach, I try to use analogies, and I'll try to figure out anything that's someone else that I'm discussing with, it's something they have a depth of experience in, and then I'll try to relate jiu-jitsu or relate whatever we're discussing to that. The way that I would, generally speaking, describe a guard or an effective guard game is one that covers all of our ranges. So, for instance, let's say I can't come up to you and when talk about boxing and being like, I don't jab, I really like the hook. If I were to go to Oscar De La Hoya or just say Manny Pacquiao and be like, dude, what do you think of the straight right hand? They'd look at me like I have a second head on my shoulders because what do you mean? What do I think? I use it when it's the right tool. I don't when it isn't. And I guess imagine, let's say you're a soldier, you have a weapon with a scope for when I'm 300 yards away from you. You have a short-barreled weapon that you can turn corners with and operate in close spaces. And then if you get real tight, you have a knife. And let's say even that goes away, then you have your hand. So the way that I would describe an effective guard game as I understand it is basically I need to be able to address each range. You may be far from me, you may be very, very close to me, and you may be kind of at a mid-range. So I feel like a lot of times what people will do is they'll start to develop one guard, but let's say, like a blue belt or a purple belt that I find has like, man, this guy's got a really tough half guard. If I can stay at a range where they're not able to employ their tool, or their favorite tool at the very least, they're going to have a hell of a time. For instance, there's all kinds of different passes. I can pass you close, I can pass you far, I can pass you with motion, I can pass you with pressure. Each one there's an appropriate tool for the time, I guess, in the way that I would describe jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu is not a hammer, jiu-jitsu is a toolbox. And you're going to use the appropriate tool to deal with me, let's say lanky and flexible guy, and there would be an entirely different tool that would be appropriate for dealing with someone, let's say, a skill, all skill aside, obviously he has significantly more skill than I do, but let's say Marcelo Garcia, who is a little shorter and stockier, just because there are things that physically I can do that he can't, and physically things that he can do that I can't. And as a result, you should approach this differently, regardless of our specific games and of our skill levels. And I guess that I would say like a half guard has always been useful for me because I can handle the situation when the guy's very, very close. The 50-50 is even closer than that, so I like that as well. I like to have a mid-range style of guard like the De La Hiva And then when you start to move away from me, I'll come to my seated guard. Or let's say, for instance, I were Michael Lange, maybe that would be the spider guard. But you notice that people don't attempt to employ a hammer when a screwdriver is the proper tool. If I'm attempting to develop my guard, I need to be effective from range A, B, and C. I need to know not only what are the concepts and ideas behind my movement, but in my positions of strength and my positions that I understand, what are the things, what are the tools, what are the movements, and what are the things that are going through this person's head? How are they going to look to evaluate me? Because if I try to pressure pass a spider guard against an experienced player, that's very, very difficult. If I try to, run around your seated guard without getting you out of position, again, that can be very, very difficult. So I feel like in the lower levels of jiu-jitsu and the more beginner levels, like white, blue, purple, things like that, there's all kinds of things that work or feel like they work because the other player is, has gaps in their game. Like I know there were all kinds of things that worked on me when I was, white or blue or purple or brown, or even still work now that I know won't work in the future. And there was all kinds of things that I was able to get away with, or I'm even still able to get away with on a certain level of black belt, but then you go and you want to talk about the elite level guys, you're like, all right, well, there's not 5 valid moves here. Maybe there's only 1. There's only 2. And it's difficult to see that sometimes if you're not constantly faced with problems of that nature, problems of that level. So I would say try to develop a distance guard, try to develop something for when the guy tries to run around you, try to develop something when they're trying to crush you, and know how to utilize your guard and transition between them. And then it should grow organically on its own. Most of the guys that are traditionally half guard players tend to be a little stockier, except for, let's say, Lucas Lech, who uses his half guard extremely well and has, I guess I kind of a similar build to him. I find, for instance, because I'm taller and skinnier, it's more difficult for me to get underneath people because there's more person to fit in there. But once I get underneath you, I'm able to stretch the person out very effectively. Whereas, let's say, I don't have a good butterfly guard, but like a guy like Marcelo Garcia, aside from the fact that, again, he has far more skill in that position than I do, I feel like it fits his body type particularly well, the way he plays his butterfly guard. But look at Leo Santos from Novo União back in the day, who, again, had an incredible butterfly guard, incredible, maybe the best ever. And he's taller than I am and lankier, so he was able to make it work. It's just where I can't always necessarily look at an elite level player or someone and say, I want to do exactly what this guy's doing. Because there's all types of factors like you described before, physical factors, height, width, strength, flexibility that make moves fit me or not fit me, and also fit me or not fit me based on my opponent at the time. So again, I guess it's difficult to give concrete advice, but the idea is you should need the game plan, you need to understand what are the possibilities and try to have an answer for most of the situations.
Now, prior to this interview, Ryan, I sent out an email to my newsletter list, and I asked them if they had any questions for you, and I'm trying to cleverly weave them in as best as I can because there were hundreds of questions. One of the questions that came up fairly often is the types of guard that you are most known for, say the deep half and say the 50-50, how would those be modified, and are there modifications that you can do to make them work in a mixed martial arts context or in a self-defense context? You don't do MMA, I don't think, but you must have thoughts on the subject.
Well, I honestly always get a bit of a chuckle out of that one because I don't fight MMA professionally at this point, although I'd like to try in the future. And again, I can only speak from my experience, and obviously I'm not in the UFC. I'm not fighting at the top level or anything like that. But again, I hope to learn and hopefully one day get to that level if possible, if I'm able. But I've used the half guard, I've trained MMA with a lot of very, 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 very good MMA guys. And when I've been able to keep it in my area of strength, jiu-jitsu relative to them, area of strength relative to them, I've been able to make all kinds of things work. Again, punches or no punches. The idea I can't sit there and hang out, but I always thought it was funny, like every now and then I'll hear like, oh, I would just punch you in the face in the 50-50. I'm like, oh, I'm not so sure about that. Your knee might not be functioning at the end of that punch, or the sweep. But there's all kinds of things. It's because in my mind, jiu-jitsu is not a move. It's how to move. It's like, like my wrestling coach isn't better than me because he knows the single leg better. It's just any time that I start hand fighting, I'm like, holy crap, I'm completely off balance. The second that I start to engage with this person, it gets really, really rough. Oscar De La Hoya is not a better boxer than me simply because he's jabbed more. He has an understanding of movement and timing that I would be lucky if I had a lifetime to practice if I could get to that level. And there's no move that I can practice or drill that's going to get me to that level of ability. And I guess, I think a lot of times what will end up happening for jiu-jitsu guys who are of some repute is, they'll get thrown in over their heads because they have shitty management. It's ridiculous. If I go to fight MMA, it's going to be tough for me to do that because the guys that I need to be fighting are 0-1, 1-1, 2-1, 0-0, because I may have some degree of ability or recognition in jiu-jitsu, but I'm not a high-level MMA guy. But most of those guys are probably not going to want to fight. And what's going to end up happening is someone will be like, "Hey, man, I'm 8-0. I'd love to fight you, Ryan." And I'm like, "Ooh, that's a rough one." Because there's so much experience that goes into getting in the cage. Just like even if I were up the level maybe in jiu-jitsu to be able to compete in Abu Dhabi, if that were my first tournament, I would probably get smashed. It's just because I don't have the experience. I may not get used to playing the game. There's so many factors that go in there. Even if I'm able to have a level of effectiveness in practice, it's going to be very, very different. So I think there's all kinds of things like that you can use in jiu-jitsu, whether it's half guard, whether it's, half guard is extremely effective, I think, in MMA and in my limited experience sparring MMA if you do it well, because most guys in MMA really don't have very good jiu-jitsu. The only difference is in MMA you don't have to engage me, and that's the real trick. Is there's all kinds of things that, like, say for instance, if I were to train with Marcelo Garcia, if I stay in the cut and I actually get after him, the fact that he's significantly better than me is really going to result in a lot of submissions if I'm constantly attacking him. Now, if I want to play very safely and not go after him at all, odds of him getting me is still very, very, very strong. But I'm artificially prolonging the match by not really fighting him. It's the same way if I want to box Oscar De La Hoya, or let's say I want to box Manny Pacquiao. They're too good. I would have no teeth in 10 seconds. But let's say someone less good than that, but someone still far better than me. If I ever plant my feet and throw my right hand, it's over. They're so much better, they're going to immediately counter me. But if all I do is keep my hands up and jab and circle, they'll knock me out eventually, no doubt about it. But, again, because I'm not fighting them, I'm not engaging them in that area, I'm not giving them too many openings. It's no different than when you get like say someone with a degree of wrestling ability, not a super high level, but some level of wrestling ability. If they actually try to pass your guard, I'll tap them in 4 seconds. But if they want to push you in the face and run in circles, they're going to, again, because they're not engaging you, it can be very, very tough. So the problem in my mind in the MMA aspect is that you have to be able to force them to grapple, and that's the tough part. So it's not so much like I would be concerned if I were in the 50-50 about getting punched in the face. It would be getting to the 50-50 and being able to hold it for a moment, because I would have pretty decent amount of faith in my ability to get on top, to sweep, to control from that point. If Roger Gracie is able to mount, King Mo Lawal, I don't really have too much doubt of the outcome. The question is he able to get him to the floor? If they were to grapple and there was no referee and there was no forced engagement, Roger, I don't think would be able to submit him. I mean, not that he's not way better, just that King Mo is a great wrestler and he's going to be hard to take down, and if he doesn't have to engage and ever try to pass, it can be difficult. But let's say I'm on the outside and I say if you take 2 steps backwards, just like in college wrestling, I'm going to start to penalize you, and King Mo has to come forward. I mean, does anyone really think that he would ever pass Roger Guard in a million years? I wouldn't think so. So I would say there's so many factors that come into play. It can be difficult, but anything that you practice to a super high level, I believe, can be effective.
Okay. Let's just talk very quickly about one specific position, the 50-50. And I've seen bits and pieces of your DVD series on the 50-50, and it was mostly without the gi. And without the gi, you concentrate quite heavily on things like the heel hook, the reverse heel hook, and the whole footlock game. Could you talk a little bit about the 50-50 in the context of the gi, where most of the times when I've seen it, it really is a stalling position, and it kind of relates to what you were talking about with just getting up a couple of points or getting in a position where you can then stall for the rest of the match?
Yeah, I guess if for whatever small role I've had in popularizing the 50-50, I'd like to apologize to the grappling world, because it is hideous to watch matches where people just lax themselves in there and refuse to move. It's absolutely awful. And it is everything that people complain about it being,
Not without the gi. I mean, without the gi, and if you allow leg locks.
This is true. Yeah. It's much more difficult for me to stall on you if every single time I make one false move, you can leg lock me. No doubt about that. I think, the IBJJF rules about knee reaping and whatnot are absolutely, silly. And I've reaped a lot of knees before, and I've never hurt anyone with it. I've had my knee reaped many, many times, and when they crossed that magical line on my hip with their foot, mercifully my ACL didn't explode. But, although still holding breath in anticipation. But
one day we'll have a special podcast, just people bitching about the leg lock rules.
It's the most asinine thing in the world. Yeah. But anyway, with the as far as stalling with the gi-on, I guess it's frustrating because with the gi-on you can latch on to me in such a way that it can be difficult to move, and then it's difficult to perceive who is exactly doing the stalling. I mean, in my mind, jiu-jitsu needs a better stalling call in general, and I mean the 50-50 is kind of the vogue position at the moment, for stalling and doing nothing. And I think that a big part, something that might go a long way towards fixing that is stop giving points for a sweep when I just rock my way up to the top. That doesn't do anything. If I don't disengage myself from the position, then I don't believe that I should be given points, because otherwise there's no incentive to do it. Like if you look at some of the elite guys who are incredible with the 50-50, it's not as if they can't sweep. It's that there's no incentive to do it. And at the end of the day, people, say for instance, a tournament like the World Championships, not only are you going to have the best players, generally speaking, so that means you're going to have the least skill disparity when you start to get towards the quarterfinals and whatnot. So much is on the line, like big money or anything like that. But, it's the biggest prize in all of gi jiu-jitsu. So much is on the line, people don't want to lose. So if my ultimate goal is winning and I get points every single time I pretend to try to pass your guard or I pretend to try to sweep you, I'm rewarded for that. But let's say I have a match with you, and I get myself to the 50-50. I'm like, yay, I'm going to have a heck of a time tapping you, because every single time I go for the toe hold, you're going to go for the toe hold, and we're going to stare at each other, and we're going to both make faces and kind of pretend like we're trying to finish, and that's mostly taking time. But then I'm able to somehow get on top. I'm like, all right, sweet. Well, if I disengage from the 50-50, you might, I don't know, take my back, pass, score, who knows, man. I'm like, oh, crap, I could lose. But if I just hold Stephan here for God knows how long of this, unbearable-to-watch match, there's a good chance that maybe I'll be able to, ride it out. Maybe I'll ride it out by advantage, maybe the 2 points, maybe you sweep me back, but then I was on top for some measure of time and I get the referee's decision, or maybe I don't get the referee's decision, I pitch a fit, like, I don't know, like my dog just got ran over, which, again, I also think is kind of silly. But there's no incentive, because if I'm in the 50-50, you can't take my back. You can't pass my guard. It's impossible. It has nothing to do with skill. I couldn't pass yours or take your back either. The only way any of this can occur is if we leave the position. But usually what ends up happening is one guy feels he has some minor edge in this position over the other guy, or he gets an advantage for going for the toe hold or the straight foot lock, and then it just turns into the most hideous thing in the world. So I wish they would give a stalling call. And if you want to talk about making jiu-jitsu more effective for MMA, they should give a point for escapes, for getting up off of the ground, because the onus should be on me to hold you on the ground. Because if, let's say, I fight Manny Pacquiao, if we stay on the feet for any length of time, I will be headless, so I have to get him down. And once I get him down, my number one concern is not submit him. It's, Jesus H. Christ, make sure he doesn't get back up, because that'll be the end of me. So in wrestling, I think they're so effective because, again, they give points for me escaping from the bottom to get back to my feet. I think that's critical. And then, again, that stalling call would be nice. And again, there's downsides to it, because if there's a stalling call every 4 seconds, it turns it into a hyper-explosive athletic sport, which I think is great in some regards, but it really, really, narrows down the ways. Like, it's very, very hard.
The people who can compete in it, and you're going to start having injury rates go through the roof, too.
No doubt about it. And you're not going to see little guys beating big guys in a sport where I have to move every 4 seconds. It's just not realistic. And maybe that's the way that it needs to be. I'm not sure. I'm not saying what's better or worse, but I prefer to see the current state of things change a little bit, stalling call-wise, and absolutely with the 50-50, because I try not to stall from there, and I don't stall from there, actually, because just on principle, I would not do that, and I'd rather lose than do that. But, it's atrocious, and I apologize for that.
You heard it here first, people. Okay, let's move on to another technical area that you're particularly known for, and that's the triangle choke. You've finished an ungodly number of people with a triangle choke, especially earlier in your game. So can you, first of all, what are your top 3 tips for getting and finishing triangle chokes, just for people out there who are working on it, who are at the level that you were at when you were a white belt and had just started having some success with this submission?
Well, I guess the big things that I would say are creating a favorable angle, so that ideally you want to face me when I'm not facing you. It always, any time that I run head-to-head with you, my attributes are lining up against yours, and I'm having to hope that I'm stronger, faster, more flexible. I have some sort of physical edge over you that's going to allow me to be successful. Now, again, in the context of a competition, if that's where my edge lies, then you know what, I'm going to press that advantage because the goal is to win. Well, at least as you evolve in your career, by the way, and anyone who's listening, the goal is not just to win in a competition. For instance, let's say I go to a tournament that's tough, like a Grappler's Quest or something else. I've won it like literally 20 times, or something like that. And the goal is no longer to win. The goal is now to improve. For instance, when Roger Gracie comes to the World Championships, I have the sneaking suspicion he's gotten gold so many times. It's no longer about winning. It's about the quality of his win. It's about what he's doing. Is he fighting jiu-jitsu the way that he wants to fight it? And that's why I think you'll see him playing judo with people and whatnot, when obviously that's not, he's great at it, but it's not the strength of his game. So early in your career, you'll feel like you want to win every single match, any kind of way. But now it's like, all right, I want to win in a specific way. I want to win with good jiu-jitsu. I want to win with positional control. I want to make sure that I'm not abusing any physical advantages I have over these people, or maybe abusing any experience advantage. And I think that'll go a long way towards making sure that you don't plateau, as you compete. Which I know that has been a problem for a lot of people, and a problem for me as well from time to time. But I would say, getting off to a favorable angle where, again, if you're facing me and I'm not facing you, I could be, let's say, an 8 out of 10 in terms of strength and athleticism and explosiveness, so you could be a 4 out of 10. But once you start to get out of my, kind of direct line of sight, straight in front of me and a little bit more off to the side, I'm no longer have that physical advantage over you. So you're going to, 1, be able to kind of bully me from there, or 2, I'm going to try to square back up to you, and that's going to make me predictable. So either A, the status quo will remain and you'll win, or B, I'm predictable and you'll probably win anyway. So by
creating an angle, just let me make sure I understand what you're talking about. You're talking about bringing your head towards the arm that is not trapped by your legs. Bring your head towards his knee on that side of the body so that...
Well, I guess I would agree with that, Stephan, but I would also say, I guess I didn't clarify, and I apologize. I was thinking in terms of the setup for the triangle. Okay. I guess basically imagine you were holding me at gunpoint and you were circling around me. You would keep yourself square to me the entire time. Even as I stay, imagine my feet are frozen in concrete and I can't move. You would still keep me dead in your sights as you circled around me. With your head facing as if you were walking around the center point of the circle. It would almost be like you're slide stepping. And I guess, that's, creating the angle so that you can set up the triangle, creating that favorable angle, no matter what it is that you want to do, whether it's triangle, omoplata, arm drag, whatever, that's going to be in your interest. And then, when it comes to the setup, you're going to be, there's so many different ways you can do it. There's some valid ways, there's some not so valid ways. But, that's been one of the reasons that I've been critical of, for instance, like the rubber guard in the past or things like that, not because I feel that there's no value, but because it squares me up to you and I have to have an attribute advantage in order to be routinely successful against a skilled opponent there. But as soon as we get our angle and we're able to set the triangle up, then immediately I'm taking posture control. More than anything else, I want to bend your spine because it makes you physically weak. Again, that's another one of those. If imagine doing a bench press and then all right, and I'm able to lift whatever it is. I'm able to lift X, whatever it is I'm capable of. And then you say, all right, Ryan, now I want you to crunch your neck up and I want you to look to the side. I guarantee you it will be, X divided by 4 or something like that. There's no way that I'm going to be as physically powerful. If I'm able to twist your head around in any fashion whatsoever, you become way less physically powerful, which is absolutely in my interest. It helps me lock the triangle, helps me control you in general, and it also makes it very, very difficult for you to pick me up. Not impossible for you to pick me up, but you've also seen Quentin Jackson versus, Hikaru Arona, for instance. But I cut down the number of people who will be able to just rip me up off the ground like I'm a child, and that's very important. It will contribute to your ability to manipulate your opponent's arm. It will contribute to your ability to create an angle, as you were describing, from within the triangle, underhooking either their arm that's not trapped, the free arm, underhooking that, or underhooking the leg. And as far as the triangle goes for mixed martial arts, and again, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I'm not a high-level MMA fighter at this point. But underhooking the arm, I feel it's a great idea because it limits the ability of that guy to hit you with it, which even if it doesn't finish you, even if it's not going to knock you out, no one likes getting punched in the face 45 times, even chip shots. So you're able to get all the way inside of your opponent's defense because you're able to control. You have my arm trapped between your legs and around my neck, but you're able to take your free arm and you're able to go underneath my free arm, which pretty much takes away all of my defense. I have no ability to press you away from me, which is the defense of the triangle. For instance, when you attempt to arm lock me and extend my arm, generally speaking, I want to compress you to prevent you from doing that. When you attack me with the triangle, if I attempt to compress you once you've got it locked, I choke myself. So what I generally want to do is create distance. And if I'm creating distance, say I start to lift you up in a tournament and I'm allowed to slam you, and you come with me. So what I want to do is use my arms in such a way that I'm able to create distance while keeping you in place. And that's obviously not in your interest if you're the triangle choker. So what you're going to be wanting to do is, again, either unhook the leg or better yet, unhook my arm. So all of your weight is hanging from my neck and you're completely inside of my defense. The last thing I would be thinking is, I guess, my opponent's arm position. And sometimes you move the arm, sometimes you don't. But the idea is I'm really concerned more about your shoulder, about rolling your shoulder of your trapped arm into your neck. And I'm able to do that a variety of different ways. Sometimes it makes sense to move their arm across, sometimes it doesn't. But remember, it's not about moving the arm across. We have to understand cause and effect. And that's the real trick. It's really all about the shoulder, and it's really all about covering off that second carotid artery, the one that's not covered by your thigh. And that means you can sometimes move my arm across, sometimes you can close it with your fist, sometimes you're able to compress my arm in such a way where my shoulder just rolls into there on its own. But the idea is focus on that artery, focus on just closing that space in any way that makes sense at the time, and you'll be more successful than if you're a slave to a specific routine, like saying, oh, I always pull the arm across, well, I always do this, because, always, again, every, situation dictates response, and an answer is right or wrong only based on the context of the specific situation at the time. So I'd say it's irresponsible to give advice and say, like, well, I always move the arm this way, or I always move the arm that way. Because you have people with weird builds, you have people with who are super strong, people who have giant shoulders and skinny little necks. One of the purple belts at the gym, a guy named Kenny Savercool, in addition to having Emperor Palpatine-like hands, it looks like he's shooting blue lasers at, blue lightning at Luke Skywalker. And he would argue that, but he would be wrong. Like if triangling that guy, man, it's like the hardest thing in the freaking world because he's got big, broad shoulders and the skinniest neck you've ever seen. And it's like, what the hell? You'll pull his arm across or do whatever, and there's still just a little gap in there. So, again, if I were trying to pull an arm across or if I were just doing a technique out of a book or out of a DVD, I'd be like, man, the triangle doesn't work. But if I think all I need to do is close off that carotid artery, how? Make it a logic problem. You can say, well, I've got my fist, I've got my forearm, I've got all these other options. If all I think about is the end is the process and the end result, I'll do a lot better than if I'm always thinking of a specific tool that may or may not be valid in that situation.
Cool. Well, could you talk a little bit about how with your relationship to the triangle? I mean, you said that it was your primary tool initially. Have you moved away from it a little bit?
I would say very much so. I still like the triangle. First off, I triangled so many people that my freaking knees hurt, man. I think that, I overused it to the point where, it helped and I was able to be reasonably successful. And again, I had to deal with people knowing exactly what I do for a very long time. And, even since a very early stage when I've been training for about, a year. And I feel like I'm very thankful for that because it forced me to work harder in order to try to keep up with people. And sometimes I was able to and sometimes I wasn't. I had to rely so much on my strengths because everyone knew what I was doing. I had to be so good at it that I could make it work anyway. And again, sometimes I could, sometimes I couldn't. But the idea was it would have been very difficult to have a mediocre at everything kind of game because people would have smashed me. I had to be very, very comfortable with what I did and be able to force it on people, which, again, I had some success with. But I used the triangle, to the exclusion of everything else. And I feel like, it did stunt my growth for a little while, although it's hard to say specifically just because, again, I think I was a purple belt in about 2 years, and then I spent about, a little less than 2 years at every belt, so I didn't really have tons and tons and tons of time to grow at any particular level. So I would always have to be sticking with my competition game, which, I feel like there are good and bad things there. But now I don't use the triangle as often simply because, I prefer to go for higher percentage submissions. If it comes down to me attacking the triangle off of the back or me attacking the rear naked choke, I'm attacking the rear naked choke. Not that the triangle, if someone makes a glaring error, I won't go for it. But the idea is if I go for it, what happens? What's the cause and effect here? So fairly large risk, fairly large reward. If I miss the triangle, I end up on the bottom, and I'm like, crap. If I manage somehow to get on Cabrina's back, my number one concern is, dear God, stay there, not how can I submit him. I would try and try and try. I'd prefer to try the cross choke 45 times and get it on the 45th than spin for the arm lock, pray to God I get it, and then if I miss, I lose my only dominant position of the match. I guess it's the same idea. Imagine if every single person you ever grapple with were Rickson Gracie. If you mounted, no matter how good I am, if you're mounted on me the entire time or if you're on my back the entire time, I can't beat you. short of me just reaching up and somehow cross-stroking me, which actually happened to me once. I got put to sleep by that and by my friend Seth. That was embarrassing. But, your number one concern becomes about submission or about position rather than everything else because, again, at the low level, there's so many, mistakes made. There's so many epic matches. You'll see, like, I mount you, and then you get out, and then you get on my back, and then you put me in a triangle, and somehow I get out. And it's really more of a function of I'm not able to finish you because I don't have the experience. But, at the level that I compete at now, if someone...
One mistake, it's over.
Exactly. And if it's not, then you got lucky. It's not really like, I'm so good I managed to get out of your arm lock. It's just, man, maybe you were hungover and you happen to have a bad day because if you get that same arm lock, you're going to put me away. So I would just say, my approach has changed over time, simply out of necessity. And also, MMA fighting and using jiu-jitsu for fighting is a big concern for me, even though, a lot of times, again, I'll do what I'm very comfortable with and I'll do it, in tournaments, to win, but I feel like the mount is my favorite position, and my strongest position, and it really becomes about, am I able to do this to someone bigger, stronger, more athletic than me in a situation where they could also hit me, and even though that's not always what I'm focusing on in tournaments, that's always in my mind when I'm training, and I think that's very important to me because, again, I got into jiu-jitsu, to learn how to fight and to be able to fight. I didn't get into it to start doing tournaments or to try to be a champion. That's my goal now to try to do that because that's what I started with, but or rather that, I started competing and I'd like to see it through. But, I would be doing Taekwondo if all I cared about was, flashy tournament stuff.
Thanks. I'm now going to get hundreds of emails from Taekwondo practitioners. Thank you, Ryan.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to pass them all on to you. I'm going to give them your home address. So who have been your influences in the later part of your game? Obviously, you've got a fairly well-known training relationship with Marcelo Garcia in New York City, and it sounds like you're doing a lot more wrestling as well. And can you talk a little bit about what your game looks like later in your career and who helped bring it there and what you're doing to keep it at a high level?
Well, absolutely. I guess I feel so fortunate to have been able to meet and train with, some of the best guys in the world. And like you said, Marcelo Garcia, I feel like, again, I have really, really relished the opportunity to train with him and to train with his students in his academy. And it's an incredible place and a great place where they're very open. Like anyone can go there, anyone can train. And it's very, I wouldn't even call it unique these days in that regard, but it certainly would be if it were a couple years back. But it's a very, very special place where there's great, great training. And Marcelo is, without question, the best middleweight grappler in the world. And it's been incredible to see him stay on top for so long, just because he's constantly evolved, and everyone watches him, and everyone knows what he's doing, and heck, he's even got a website now where he puts his teaching lessons on the internet, and he's still able to stay on top, and it's been, just watching him over time, he's always been, like an idol of mine, someone that I've always looked up to and tried to model aspects of my game after, though I don't really claim to be doing that very well. I try, and, to the opportunity to be working with him now, I really feel very fortunate, and there's so many things, like in the beginning, I remember I went up to the academy, and I would, I'd take the classes, and I'd always like them, and I was like, I don't know, I'm going to do exactly what he says, but I don't know how it's going to fit into my game, but I'm going to try. I'm just going to keep on trying, because, again, it's like if Marcelo Garcia says something, or same thing, Roger Gracie says something, I don't sit there and be like, well, I'm not so sure about that. I'm like, you know what, I think these guys probably know a little bit better than me, so I'm just going to take, on at face value, everything they say. And, since the time that I spent there, man, I've seen the genius of it, and I really feel like it's making a big impact on my game, training with Marcelo. And I'm going to be going there actually tomorrow to start, a 6-week training camp for ADCC and, do what I can to try to help, push Marcelo as much as I'm capable of. And I know that, I'm getting my butt kicked and learning all kinds of stuff, and I hope to put on the best performance that I've ever had at ADCC, be in good shape and feeling good for it. And I guess a couple of other influences, Bruno Frazado was the first elite-level grappler that I'd ever trained with. And, I feel like most people know Bruno, but he's, multiple-time, Brazilian national champion at black belt. He's won the ADCC trials for Brazil twice, and he's, a couple-time runner-up at the Worlds. He's incredible, and he's made a really, really big impact on my game. He was the first person who taught me how to pass the guard, and that alone made a very, very, very big difference. I remember when I started training with him.
You didn't know how to pass the guard before that?
No, honestly, no. He was the first person to show me something that really worked for me, to be frank. And Lloyd Irvin, when I was training back with his team, he brought Bruno down to Camp Springs because Bruno was a friend of Wilson Hayes, they were old teammates. Wilson Hayes is a great grappler from Godoy in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he lives up at in Philadelphia, trains with one of Lloyd's black belts, a guy named Jared Weiner. And, so he was friends with Bruno, and I guess that was the connection there. And I remember I saw Bruno compete at Abu Dhabi in 2007, and he ended up sticking around in the States, and I got to train with him, a little bit for about a month, and it just made such an impact on my game. I really feel like, and that was what allowed me to be successful the following year, because after training with Bruno, I remember I won the Nogi Worlds, I won the Europeans, I won the World Championships in the gi, and, I was working hard and trying my best, but, just that kind of gave me a lot of confidence and gave me the opportunity to see, like, wow, that's what jiu-jitsu is, and it gave me something to aspire to. Even though I'd been, of course, training with tough guys before, it was just another level. And he made a big impact on my game, and we still train to this day from time to time, even though we're actually going to be in Abu Dhabi, potentially competing against one another. Another huge influence on my game, recently has been Marcelo Santana, and I think he's one of the most underrated guys in jiu-jitsu, man. He's incredible, absolutely incredible. With him, he and Marcelo Garcia beat the crap out of me worse. And there's plenty of people that beat me up, but they're worse than anyone I've ever trained with. Like, it makes me feel like I'm like, yikes, I got to figure this stuff out, because I remember the first time I trained with Marcelo, I couldn't decide. I was just walking up to my school in the winter one day, and I forgot that his parents live pretty close to my gym, and he just decided to come by, and I was like, that is either Cuban dictator Fidel Castro or Marcelo Santana, elite level grappler, and I'm like, I'm not sure which guy this is. And then he ended up. I had no idea, because I'd never met him to that point, and he decided he wanted to come train, and super nice guy, beat the crap out of me, showed me all kinds of neat stuff. It was an awesome experience getting to train with him, and he's beaten so many of the best guys also in the world. It's just I really don't feel like he gets the recognition he deserves. He's absolutely one of the best, and incredible passing. So that's been incredible passing game. That's been a big influence. And also another one of my buddies, Jake McKenzie. He's a Canadian black belt from Nova Scotia, and he's down in Brazil living right now, training with GF Team. But we've competed a couple times in the past, and we became friends. And man, he's a great guy, great competitor, great training partner, and he is an incredible half guard, and I really feel like my half guard has developed, thanks to his help as well, because we play kind of a similar style, and getting to train with him and getting to hear what he thinks and learn a little bit about his approach has also made a really big impact, and he likes to come around for a couple months a year to the gym, and again, it's always great training with him. So again, I feel so fortunate to be able to learn from so many of the best, and I'll do my best to hopefully one day get to that level myself.
It's pretty cool that these people will share stuff. And that takes us back to Marcelo Garcia. To me, it's pretty amazing that he does teach potential competitors who come into the school. He does put everything he teaches online. And most of his potential competitors are watching his stuff and getting opportunities to figure out how to shut him down. It's potentially disastrous, but in fact, it actually adds greater credibility to him, because he's just won the Mundials for the umpteenth time, despite the fact that all of his competitors probably knew exactly what he was about to do.
I would completely agree with that. I think it's incredible, and like you said, it's just a testament to how good he is, and also just obviously how much he works on staying ahead of the curve. He's not one of those guys that he won something and then immediately gets a big head, and you're like, oh man, all right, way to go, because he could have called it quits in 2003, 2004, and been massively respected, but he's just kept on going since that time. And when you meet him, he's nicest guy in the world, super humble, is great, and and it's a unique opportunity to really not only train with someone who's on that incredibly high level, but also see how they approach the game. And it's like how does he stay motivated? When he's won, like you said, for that many times in a row. He's barely lost a match. I don't think he's lost a match in his weight class, right, except for the Pablo Popovich, God knows how long. And it's incredible. And I wonder sometimes, like for instance, like the Roger Gracie factor, he's won the world's at the black belts level so many times, like something that I would hope to be able to do once, one day if I'm lucky. And what's it like when you've won 10 times? Does he approach grapplers, or rather, the IBJJF World Championships, because he's just so good, the way that maybe, I might approach, a local tournament? And I don't know if he does, and I don't know if he doesn't, but I was curious about that, and I wonder, maybe Marcelo, in addition to just wanting to, really spread his jiu-jitsu, which is obviously, some of the best in the world, does he need the extra challenge? I have no idea, and I actually haven't asked him, but I'm curious.
Well, let's take this all from the high level to the concrete level. You said you're heading up for your training camp now?
Yes.
And so what are your next 6 weeks going to look like? And obviously you're going to be training with Marcelo, you're going to be training with other people. Do you do any conditioning, any strength training, endurance training on top of all that actual sparring with people? And what's your ratio of training to sparring or drilling to sparring?
Well, I guess ordinarily, I do a lot of drilling, and I really feel like when I don't drill a lot, I become pretty sloppy, and I'll notice, holes in my game. I feel like it's very important, at least in my mind, and something that I feel has been able to allow me to be, reasonably successful in spite of pretty much having no one, of a really high level to train with for a very, very long time, has been able to structure my training so everything is goal-oriented. So rather than like, all right, let's just go beat the crap out of each other every single day, it's, we're going to get our drilling rounds in. Sometimes it's time to roll easy, so we're, playing around and finding new movements, seeing what's what. Other times it's, time to go super hard, and then we also have the strength and conditioning aspect as well. But, making sure that each step of your training isn't just random. It's not just thrown together like, oh, we beat the shit out of each other today all the time, because that's what training is. Like if that makes sense in the context of the greater plan, then that's what we do for that day or that week or whatever. But it has to all be, goal-oriented and system-oriented so that, again, if there's a problem, you get a result you don't like, you can say, all right, where's the hole in the system, rather than if there is no system and I get a result that I don't like, but there's no feedback loop, I'm left curious and wondering as to what the heck to fix. But when it comes to strength and conditioning, ordinarily I do a lot. I'll be lifting, 3-4 days a week. I had one of the students at the gym at my academy is a very, very good strength and conditioning coach, and he prepared me for Abu Dhabi last time, and I felt great. It felt stronger than ever before. He helped me for the Worlds in 2009 as well. For this one, obviously I'm going to be doing a lot of conditioning, but I'm not lifting very much simply because we have to weigh in 145 on, mat side. Whereas 2 years ago there was a 24-hour delay in the weigh-in, so you weighed in on Friday, you fight on Saturday. And so I could probably walk in at, let's say, 154, cut 9 pounds, get on the scale, be fine, rehydrate, and go. If I lift, I've noticed that I gain weight very quickly and I lose weight very quickly, depending upon how I go. So if I lift and I put on 3-4 pounds over the course of, let's say, the prior couple months, that's really going to become an issue because I'm not huge for 145, but I'm certainly not tiny either, and I have to be pretty disciplined about my diet. So this time out, there won't be a ton of strength and conditioning, or rather a ton of strength training, but there'll be a great deal of conditioning in addition to whatever Marcelo has planned. And I can't really speak to that because I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure that it's going to help and I'll feel better than I ever have before. And, I trust him completely, and I'll be doing whatever he thinks is the best way to go.
Very cool. Well, best of luck for that, Ryan. And then we're going to wrap it up now. You've given us a ton of information. If people want to, you do have a school in Arlington, Virginia, so Washington, D.C. area.
Yep.
And that website for that is 5050bjj.com, I believe, right? 5050bjj.com?
Yep, that's correct. And again, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of people come in lately. Actually, one of the guys who's in my weight class at Abu Dhabi just stopped by for a week. David Marinakis, he won the Australian Abu Dhabi qualifier. We were training together this week. Just had Gianni Grippo from Renzo Gracie down. Alex Vamos, he's Joe DiArce black belt. One of our buddies, Josh Presley from Nova Scotia, who just got second in the Worlds this year. So we're always having different people come in to train, teach us stuff. Maybe learn a little something themselves. And anyone from anywhere is welcome at any time. We love to train with anybody. It's pretty much if you're a nice person and you want to try to kick the crap out of people and train super hard, the door is always open. So again, if anyone would ever like to visit, you're always more than welcome, and I'd be excited to train with you.
Very cool. And if people are interested in bringing you up for a seminar, not in the middle of your training camp, but before it or after it, they get in touch with you through your website there as well, 5050bjj.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. I love to get around, and I do what I can, and I try not to suck if it's a seminar, and if it does suck, you can definitely punch me.
Somehow I doubt very, very much that it would suck. But I think seminars@don'tsuck.com, if you want that URL, I think it's probably still available, and you should go and register it right now.
I should get on that, actually. I appreciate the heads up.
BJJ Seminars@don'tsuck with Ryan Hall. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. Best of luck in your training, and we'll be watching you very carefully.
Thanks so much, Stephan. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Podcast listeners, if you found this interesting or useful or entertaining, please pass this episode on to somebody else in your social circle or in your training circle. Surely there's somebody else out there who would also find it interesting. This is the way the podcast grows. It's an organic growth by people like you passing it on to their friends and the people that they know. I really, really appreciate this kind of sharing. So thank you so much in advance, and good luck with your training.